I read the final cut by Charles Burns on Sunday night, and after I finished reading it, I thought that it was his more straightforward story when you compare them to Black Hole and the X-Doubt trilogy. However, I was left unsettled after the reading, and I kept thinking about it the rest of the evening. And for the past few days, it's been on my mind. And like with anything by Burns, you just can't read it just one time. You have to return to it. And that's exactly what I did. If you had to categorize this book, and that's something those of us who are familiar with Burns, he's not a cartoonist you can easily categorize. As you would say, this is a coming-of-age story. It takes place in the 70s, and it's that borderline area between adolescence and adulthood, a very difficult time in one's life as you're transitioning from one period in your life, one stage in your life, into another. And in our story, you have two characters. You have Brian and Laurie, who you see here. Now, we learn more about Brian. We get more into his mind than we do into Laurie's. But they're both important to the story. What is central to this are three films and the idea of movies. Movies are extremely important to Burns in this storyline. And it may be they're important to him in all his work, I think. The movies that he grew up with from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And as myself, as a kid of the 70s and the early 80s, all of us saw many of these B movies on television, the science fiction films and such. And that was all that was available to us in the evenings, in the afternoons, and on the weekends. But what Burns is able to do is to take from them something very human, something at the very foundation of our emotions. Now, there are three films central in this story. The first is The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And what you have here is Brian and Laurie. They go to see this film in the theater. And what he finds quite arresting in the film, and she's quite taken by him when he watches this, is that he's quite affected when his wife falls asleep and she's now a clone. Now in the film, the clones are basically devoid of any emotion, the things that make us very, very human, of who she was. Now she's just like everyone else. Now in the story that we have here, Brian is an artist. You saw some of his work there. Now, one may think that someone like Laurie or anybody else would see his work and be repulsed by it, or think this man is too strange for me to deal with. But she's actually interested in his work. The next film that's important to our story, that they see together, again, towards the end of our story, is The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. Now this is based on, this is the first, I think, adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend. And I think probably the most faithful of them ever made. Now here, the Vincent Price's wife, the character, she has died. And the thing is, though, he did not put a stake to her heart. So she comes back as a vampire. Now the vampires are much different than the clones that we saw in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They are basically filled with passion, raw passion, unbridled passion in some way, you could say. But she loses her humanity. Now, this gives you the idea of if you were with the person you were in love with, to be the last two people on earth, Adam and Eve, unclouded by anyone else, any other people, just you and the person you desire the most. Now, these are true science fiction films. However, in the middle of our story, Brian, on his own, goes to see The Last Picture Show, the Peter Bogdanovich film, adapted by, based on the Larry McMurtry novel. Now, this story here, unlike the other two, is realistic. And the scene that arrests him, now he sees this film by himself. He doesn't see it with Laurie. And he begins to think, maybe I'll take her to see it. Now, there's a famous scene in this film where Sybil Shepherd's character, I think her name is Jacy, she does a striptease, basically at a pool from a friend of hers who's very, very wealthy. However, she has a watch. Now, her boyfriend is a working class kid who spent many months saving up money for this watch. Now, when she jumps into the pool, she doesn't take off the watch. Now, for Brian, this is a very important scene in the film because she's rather being inconsiderate about this young man, inconsiderate of his affection for her. Now, he wants to take Laurie to see the film. And what Burns does here, as you probably have already seen, he redraws some of those images into the comic. But as he's thinking about it, he maybe thinks it's not a good idea to take her to go see this film. And it's not for the reasons because of the nudity and other things in here. It's because this film is very, very real. And also, it really, whatever illusions we have about love, whatever illusions we have about happiness, are tested here. And The Last Picture Show, those of you who have seen it or read the novel, takes place in a small Texas town, and you have these very young people. They're starting out in their life, and many of them are going to be very disappointed, much like the adults that live in this town. Disappointed in their life, disappointed that the people that they love are not the people that they're with, and the object of beauty that mattered to them remains impregnated in their mind. Now, in our story, what it basically is a group of friends. They're making a film, a simple little movie. Laurie's going to be the star of the film, little science fiction film, not a big deal, right? And Brian is helping out with the film. But towards the end of the movie, towards the end of the film, I said movie by mistake. I think because what this book does, this basically is like a film. It's called the final cut. Now, what if one could make a movie and you had a wish fulfillment, right? And you want something to come true as a movie, a story, a poem, or a song, where you have a satisfying conclusion, a happy ending, a director's cut, the final cut. Would you do it? But would it have an ending like in the science fiction films? Or would it have an ending like in the Last Picture Show? Or would it have an ending like a Hallmark film, which typically has a happy ending, even though the resolution is very contrived? It's a wish fulfillment of some kind, right? Brian loves Laurie, the object of his desire. And towards the end of the film, when they're all sitting together, watching the movie that they make, we get into Brian's mind. And we begin to think, what kind of movie would he have made? He's in love with Laurie. But is Laurie in love with him? And if she's not, then what does he do? How does he go on? We all go through this, right? The object of one's desire. What makes one's what brings up our happiness. Life is not so easy. It's many times like the last picture show. But if you can, would you make your own cut? Your own final cut? But would it be based on reality or on the illusion, the wish fulfillment of what you would want life to be like? Charles Burns, The Final Cut. Thank you for viewing.